in the gym and it's squat day, it's legs. So we're going to squat a lot today, make sure everything's turned off. So how do we warm up for squats? How do we get into squats? Now, it's not as straightforward a question or answer as you might think, because a lot of people's squats are a bit poor, quite frankly. So if I'm working with a client and typically we will have assessed them prior to any kind of exercise program starting, so I'll already have an idea, or I'll know where they've got restrictions, where I need to mobilise, etc., etc. But you good people may not have done that kind of thing. So the first question is, can you squat? Or where is your squat at a base level? So if I was working completely cold with someone and we hadn't done any kind of assessment, that would be my first question is, okay, let me see your squat. So we take it to a real basic level. So depending on their age, their kind of obvious mobility level or ability level, I might ask them just to sit on the ball for me, or on a bench or a high chair. Sit and stand. Okay, just sit and stand for me. Make sure the ball's not going to run away. Sit and stand for me. See where they're at. So what I'm looking for here is kind of any kind of chronic knee instability or patterns that look a bit odd. Are the hips moving nicely up and down? What's their confidence level like? Are they confident in doing that? Are they able to do it under control? Or are they kind of collapsing in? Are they dropping in? So those are the first kind of base assessments that I might run on someone and that you can run on yourself. Then what we're looking to do is it's that question of, okay, are we ready to ascend it? Are we ready to make it harder? Or do we need to descend it? Do I need to make this easier? So, descending a pattern, maybe instead of sitting onto a ball, would be onto a bench, onto a firm surface that isn't going to move around underneath them. Do they need support? Can I give them, a dowel rod or some sort of Nordic poles to hold on to? So then they've got another point of contact, right? So we're starting to evaluate where their base level squat is at. Now, some people are super confident and they've got good mobility and they go, oh yeah, squatting, yeah, no problems, and they just demonstrate immediately. And you go, okay, cool. So can they do a resting squat? Can they drop all the way into a resting position? Now that's a big marker as well. So if someone has the confidence to get down there, it tells you a little bit about where they're at. If they can get down there but not necessarily cleanly or really well, so let's say they say, yeah, I can do it, and they drop down and the heel is off the ground. So, but they're happy in this position. I'd say, okay, what happens if you put your heels on the ground? I'm just going to fall backwards. Right, okay, so then we know that we might have some mobility issues at the ankle, maybe at the hip. There might be some spinal restrictions that's going to stop them actually dropping back into this position. Now, sometimes you can work those by going into that deep position. So you might move over to a support system and you say, okay, how does it feel if you drop down and you hold on to something, and all of a sudden they can get their heel on the ground because of that level of support. So you've got, you can look then at ankle mobility and you can work through there. So another simple kind of ankle mobility is, okay, if we position you half kneeling on the floor, shin in vertical, do you get good knee over toe travel whilst the heel stays on the ground? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We need good knee over toe for a deep squat, or for even just a good squat. So if there's a restriction there, always check both sides, because if they've got an issue on one side but not the other, then you're going to need to either work around it, or maybe they've had ankle injuries and there's a problem there. Another way to kind of descend a squat, just in terms of warming up, would be Swiss ball, a wall squat. So you go up against the wall and you just drop into a squat pattern. You don't have to go super deep, but again, even with the Swiss ball, you can then drop really deep into the pattern. But you're just assessing, where am I at? And as you kind of run through these little assessments, you'll get a feel, or you should be able to get a feel or notice, especially if you're with a training partner, it's easy. You might notice where there's restrictions within knees, etc. So you're dropping into these positions and getting an idea for what's tight, what's not, what's good. And then the question is, okay, so it's squat day, but what's going to be my primary squat? Am I going to be using free weights? Am I going to use a machine, so maybe like a hack squat? Or a Smith machine? So how functional is your squat going to be? Now, if you're getting into back squats, grab a dowel rod. If you're going to get into back squats, then it's not just a question of hip, knee, or ankle mobility. It's a question of shoulder mobility. It's a question of thoracic, it's spinal mobility, the thoracics. So, shouldn't wear thick jumpers when you get into this. But again, can you get the bar onto the shoulder in a good position? Or if you're someone who drives a desk a lot of the time, you might be quite heavily fixed into flexion. So actually getting a bar on your shoulders is really uncomfortable. So you have to have your arms go wide in order to get the bar there. It's sitting too high on your shoulders. Effectively, it's throwing you forward, which is not good for then if you're going to squat, because what will happen is as you squat down, the weight's just going to drive you forward. So you end up into much more of a bend than a squat pattern. So if you're going to do back squats, then kind of ask yourself, okay, perhaps I need to do a lot of thoracic kind of mobilization, stretching into extension first of all. Maybe I need to stretch out the abdominal wall. Maybe I need to mobilize through the thoracics so that I can get this bar comfortably behind me, get my arms in a good position, lock the bar up onto my shoulders, away from the neck, and then squat. If I'm moving into front squats, even harder still, but arguably much more functional, then again you really need a nice mobile thoracic spine. So thoracic spine, nice and high up. Again, if you're driving a desk for a living or a car, you'll often find that thoracic spine is just kind of a little bit fixed into flexion. So you really need to mobilize the thoracic spine off. You need good wrist mobility, which can be tricky again if you're driving a desk. The wrists can get a little bit stiff. So, my front rack position isn't great. So I need to do quite a lot of work loosening off the tricep, the lats. Wrist mobility is not too bad for me. That's not really my issue. My issue is kind of through this chain. So can't demonstrate with a light bar because I just can't get into that front rack position. So for me, I have to adapt my front squat to a crossed arm position unless I spend a lot of time then working through the tricep and the lat. But again, with the front squat, you need an awful lot of thoracic mobility. You need a good ability to lift your ribcage up as you drop down into the position. So as you're dropping downwards, you need to be able to keep your arms up, or arm and ribcage up, or rather ribcage and arm up. So there's a lot to consider before you really get going on your squat. Once you've mobilised all the areas that you need to mobilise and perhaps even stretch. So again, from a stretching perspective, big culprits, calf, quad, hip flexor. They can be the sources of a poor squat. You can get an imbalance in the adductors as well. Sometimes the adductors are just too tight. So there's a lot of areas potentially that will need kind of stretching and warming before you get anywhere near your squat pattern. So let's say we've ticked off everything. So we've ticked off mobility through the ankle, through the knee, through the hips, thoracic spine. So the body is kind of mobilized to the best of your ability. And then it's time to, okay, let's actually get into squatting. So let's say we're going to do back squats, because it's pretty common, right? Actually. So to begin with, I would take an empty bar, probably not a dowel rod. For most people, if you're attempting back squats, you're probably doing it loaded. So an empty bar isn't quite enough for you. But I would take an empty Olympic bar. That's still, depending on the size of the bar, that's anywhere between 15 to 20 to 25 kilos. So take the empty bar and actually start going through your squat pattern. And again, just warm the muscles up, okay? So focus on your breathing, exhale on the way down, inhale on the way up. You can't really talk and breathe at the same, well, you can talk and breathe at the same time, but when you're trying to tie it into an exercise pattern, that's difficult. And play around with the depth. So don't do all the squats to the same depth. Play around with it, see how it feels. Warm the body up. You want to keep doing, you want to go quite high on the repetitions. 12, 20, 30 repetitions, just to get the system nice and warmed up. Again, it depends also within your workout what your objective is. Are you working on strength? Are you working on endurance? What are your sets and reps going to look like? These are kind of important questions. So I would do 2 sets maybe of warming up, where you're kind of, like I say, you've got some load, but not full load. And I would do, like I said, maybe 2 sets where you're warming up. Then I would load, so start adding some weight. And again, the question is, where are we going with this? How much load are you looking to work on? What kind of rep range are you aiming for? If you're looking to get into very heavy loads, then actually the preceding sets will be building up to it, so you won't just all of a sudden strap on 300 kilos and squat. You'll progressively build that up, and those are considered your warm-up sets, because you're not at your working intensity yet. Your working sets only happen when you're at your working intensity. So you might do somewhere in the region of, I don't know, 5 or 6 warm-up sets before you actually commit to, right, here's my working load that I'm aiming to do for 10 reps or whatever it is. And then you might do maybe 2 or 3 sets at a working intensity. So when you've got squats as your kind of primary exercise, it takes up quite a bit of time to do all the mobility work, to make sure everything is ready for the load. Legs are strong. It's a powerful exercise, and you can put on quite a lot of load into there. Even if it's body weight, even if you end up squatting your body weight, that's a lot. So you want to take your time on it. You don't want to rush it. Don't go in cold. Don't rush in there. Make sure the body's ready for it. If you need someone just to spot you a little bit, then do that. If you need to do some assisted stretching, get someone to give you a little assisted stretch. Perhaps you need your hamstrings stretched a little more effectively than you feel you can do on your own, or a quad stretch, etc. Reach out to people in the gym. That's what a lot of the staff are there for, to help you out, or if you've got a training buddy, even better. So that's how I'd warm up for squats. It's not a quick process, but it's a complicated movement. It's definitely, it is multi-joint. Can't do a squat without using multiple joints. So it's a big exercise. It's well worth warming up to. Get down to the gym and do some squats. It's a really good exercise. Great for obviously building overall strength, not just leg strength, overall strength in the body. It's actually really good on the digestive system as well, depending on the depth of the squat you can get into. I'll probably add this, that I wouldn't typically I wouldn't do a full depth arse to grass squat with load. There may be some situations and circumstances where you want to do that or need to do that, but typically I wouldn't advise that. Typically, thinking about teaching points, typically I'd keep the foot completely flat so the heel is always on the ground through the squat pattern. I wouldn't get crazily obsessed with knees over toes in terms of that being a bad thing. I would get a little bit concerned about knee collapse. So if you're someone who, when you squat, your knees have a tendency to collapse, or a knee collapses when you squat. The way to fix that is not from the foot. So sometimes you see people kind of turning the feet out aggressively to try and get the knees to follow the toe. But the knee direction is driven more from the hip. So if you're having a problem with the knees collapsing, more needs to be done on either hip mobility and or the sort of length tension relationships between, say, the inner thigh to outer. So the glute, the adductors, these areas will need a little bit of focus. Don't try and correct knee collapse by turning your toe out. Typically it doesn't work. All you see is people heading more to roll in on the foot, which creates even more issues. You can create kind of bunion issues through the big toe. So collapsing knees are corrected higher up the chain at the glutes, and working through kind of flexibility, length tension relationships around the hip area, typically. So if your squat is, come back here, if your squat is good to a point, then if you go any lower that kind of something weird starts to happen on one side, then stay to the point where you're good, address the issues that lead you to the collapse or the faulty pattern at a different time. So that then gives you something to work on in your other workouts. So there's a snapshot of how I'd get into squats. Some people, it takes a lot longer just to get away from, say, a wall squat, or actually squatting to a bench or somewhere that's safe, which is fine. Doesn't really matter because squats are great. So there you have it. Get yourself in the gym, or dedicate some time. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Dedicate some time to working out, to moving the body. And it doesn't matter how much time, if you're not very motivated, or you don't go to a gym, etc. Just try and dedicate 2 or 3 minutes, doesn't have to be that much, to creating a habit of, okay, this is when I work out, and today I'm going to do squats. And I might be just squatting to the sofa, right? Or the dining room chair. But for these 2 minutes, that's what I'm going to do. And I might be able only to do 10 squats within those 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 5 minutes. But just start creating a little bit of a habit to get into, where this is when I train and nothing stops me, nothing gets in the way. It's an important thing to do, even if you don't want to do it. I appreciate that many people don't like to exercise. I get that. But doing some is way better than none. And even if you have to force yourself or endure doing some exercise, that's the journey you've got to take. Get yourself in the gym, or dedicate to mentally, I'm in the gym, I'm training, and go get some. So until next time, squat.